Okay, you're still with me, which makes you think you're one of those people who is going to go get some of that funding. So let me explain all the different places where you can get funding for your startup. Here's a big chart. It covers a variety of stages of startup life. It starts with seed. Seed funding is when you have an idea and perhaps as far as a prototype, but no more than that. The startup phase is then from prototype to the beginnings of revenues. The early growth phase is when you have some revenues coming in and you know that adding more money in has a very high likelihood of growing the company. Rapid growth is when you're in that hockey stick and you know that if you simply double down and put a huge amount of investment down, that there's an incredibly high chance that this company will double or triple or quadruple in size. Then we get to the final stage, which is exit, which is where you cash out of this investment. And so for each stage, there are certain sources of funding that overlap as go by, but you can't start out by doing an IPO for your company. So that one's not colored in, right? Dark blue means that's a normal place to find money for that stage, and as the blue gets lighter, it gets less and less likely. So let me walk you through each of these and explain what they are, or at least the first few, since we're starting in this lecture, we're talking about seed and startup capital. All right, so as we saw before, the reality is that most companies get funded by the founders, full stop. And so first thing you should look at is how big is your savings account? How big of a line of credit on your house can you take out? How big are the limits on your credit cards? And so reality is most companies in the United States get funded by credit cards, right? An incredibly high, expensive form of debt, but it's under your control. You can take out, you can pay for what the startup costs are on your credit card, pay them back when the company succeeds, and in the case, which happens more often than we like, but in the case where you fail, you can declare bankruptcy, wipe off the debt, move on, right? So more or less, that is how 400,000 of the 500,000 companies get funded, right? Just from the own founders' money. Next most popular is friends and family. So this is exactly what it sounds like, friends and family. Now, what form does it take? That varies a lot. We don't have a lot of good research to explain. The best way to take money from friends and family is to just take it as gifts, right? And this is for a few reasons. One, your chances of succeeding are low, right? No matter what you think right now, your chances of succeeding at your business is less than 50%. So why go through all the effort of trying to paper a loan or an equity investment or whatnot with a friend or family member if the odds are you're never going to pay them back at all anyway, right? Second reason is that there's a bunch of rules about who's allowed to invest in private companies. This is called the securities laws. It's wickedly complicated. I'm going to simplify it down to one slide, right? And really it comes down to the fact that it is illegal in the United States to take money from unaccredited investors, right? Accredited investors, as a definition, it is individuals who earn $200,000 or more in income in the last 2 years, expecting to have that income again this year. If you're a couple, that number is $300,000. Or it's individuals who have $1 million in their net worth, not counting the house they live in, the main house they live in, right? If you follow either of those two, then you are by definition an accredited investor. There's no forms you have to fill out to claim this. But the reality is that the securities laws limit sale of equity, which is sale in part of your company, only to people who are accredited or the founders of the company. So if your friends and your family are not co-founders with you, then you are technically breaking the law in selling them shares anyway, or in taking their loans anyway. Happens a lot. Don't condone it, but it happens a lot. And if you want to go down that path, go down that path, but just be aware that it is technically illegal. All right, there's a new form of raising money that's shown up in the past few years. It's called crowdfunding. This is a decent way to get money from your friends and your family and their friends and family. There's a few forms of crowdfunding. The most popular right now are the donation-based crowdfunding or the pre-sales-based crowdfunding, made most famous by Kickstarter, right? If you're in the impact space, you might know Indiegogo, right? It's also a very popular place to raise money. In this form, what you do is you create an online campaign, kind of how a nonprofit would make a fundraising campaign. You can be a for-profit though and do a fundraising on Kickstarter. So what you do is you make a campaign for your product or your service that's not quite done yet. You put it out there, it's got a video and an explanation and a bunch of perks like you would see on public television. And you ask people to please donate some money to your business in exchange for something. It could be a thank you card or a t-shirt or a mug, or it could be a sale of your product or service once it's done. Kickstarter works rather well for companies that are almost ready to produce some product but want to prove out to the market validation that there are customers for this, and at the same time take their money. This is a great way to do an MVP. You make a video of something that doesn't quite exist, you put it out there for the world, and you see whether or not you can make $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 in sales before it exists. Okay? And if you're doing this for something that's a bit more cause-oriented, look at Indiegogo. There's 100 sites that do this. The flip side of that is that there are other sites that crowdfund for loans and elsewhere, and there are now crowdfunding sites for equity. There are crowdfunding sites where you can put up a campaign to sell shares in your company. Those at the moment are limited solely to accredited investors, at least in the United States. Out in the UK, they have crowdfunding equity for everyone. It's coming here in the United States. In fact, we passed the law a few years back. In 2012, the United States passed what's called the Jobs Act, and that made it legal to sell equity to any American. Right? To sell up to $1 million per year in your company, limited to 5 or 10% of the investor's income or net worth. So it's limited in how much money you can take from any given investor, but you can take money from any American whether or not they're accredited. The problem is that while it's legal to do so in terms of the law, there are no rules yet set by the SEC, which is the regulator for selling equity. And so there is no way to actually use the law until the SEC has passed its rules, and there is no end in sight into when that will happen. So good news, bad news, you can raise money from any American when the SEC is ready. We don't know when that is. We've been waiting over 2 years by this point, and we have no idea whether it's coming this year or next year or ever.